There we go. Hello.
Hello. I was like, can they hear me? Should I
They
just
were
keep
like,
making
no,
this face?
no.
How long should I make this face for? I can make
Ever.
this face for 2-hour stream of
Forever.
this. My jaw's gonna
probably
start
been
to
done.
hurt.
It's probably been done.
Is that not against terms of service? I mean, I guess if it's live, it's probably not.
I'm not so sure they really care.
You're not. Yeah. Anyway, hi everybody. Welcome to GeekSpaceTV. How are you doing today? We're here. I'm
Okay,
finishing a really dumb
Everybody's
sketch
saying
right
we
now.
have sound hype. You all heard the music, right? Like during the fan art thing, you were hearing the music, right? Right? Please? Oh, goodness. Sorry, go ahead. Hello. Hi, Pumpkin. Hi, Danger Mouse. Hi,
How y'all-
Paladin Hulk.
how y'all
Hello,
doing?
Globulos. Hello, Alyssa.
Just
Hello. Hi. Fan art had music. Okay, cool.
good. So you're rehearing sound. There was brief silence,
Hey, Cyclonus.
and
Hello.
you're doing sound again.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
Nice.
still figuring out a rhythm for how to manage all of this stuff while I'm on camera.
I'm sure that's not difficult at all. We need what we discussed.
I know,
which
we
is
do,
mugs
but
with our faces
then
at
I
the
would be
bottom.
drinking
Well, then
from
you'd have to
yours.
like steal mine and just tip it up.
Yeah, and just do the thumb thing for drinking it.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah. I really want to show everyone this drawing, but I can't. And so I'm gonna flip to a different page of my notebook. Just past a different version of this drawing.
Do you want to at least tell them what you're working on? Hey, Dutton.
It may or may not be a costume for Leviathan Season 3 for a certain returning fast food General Admiral son.
Speaking of costumes, I am so excited. Don't judge me. I am so excited about this. I got a pattern today for a Star Trek uniform. I haven't had a Star Trek uniform in decades. Literal decades.
I like that you say that, but you also have a tank top underneath that has a Starfleet logo on
It's
it.
fine. It's fine.
Like,
Hey,
I recognize that
science-
as a casual cosplay uniform.
science has
Rules.
to rep science.
Science got a science.
Yeah, science got a science. And actually, Allie bought me this necklace specifically because it reminds her of the Starfleet emblem.
I mean,
And I
you're
wear this all the
adorable
time.
nerds, but also your
So.
wedding ring is from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So, like, you fit right in with all of my things.
Oh, goodness. Hey, Evie. Whoa, that low delay is trippy, right? Right? Reading right before they even appear in chat, which is funny because there's a mod setting that allows me to delay chat. So when you type something in, it takes 6 seconds before the average viewer is going to see it. Moderators will see it first. And of course, because we're looking at the dashboard chat, that means we see it as soon as you send it. 6 seconds later, everyone sees it. With the low latency, there's about 1.5 to 3 second latency now. So I can respond to something somebody says before it appears in chat.
That's so weird. And I'm a little upset that, like, right now I don't have it.
Yeah,
I don't know why. I have looked where people have said this setting is, and I'm like, there is nothing there unless it's a mass hallucination or something. So I don't know. Someday it'll appear on my stream. Or won't. You know, it's Twitch.
Evie, that's awesome. Or Mrs. Evie, that's awesome. Hey, Osborne. Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. That's the real truth. I am bending time to have this functionality.
That makes sense.
Busted.
I'm not. I
Hey,
would
Cat
100%
Sardonic.
believe it. I need my sweater
Hi,
with this
Grenla.
air conditioner on. I'm not complaining.
I'm too warm. But I don't want to just sit here and wear this tank top because I don't feel like it's an appropriate outfit by itself certainly not for somebody my age. As many centuries old as I am, it's odd. Hey, Death Star Taco.
Once you're basically dead, I've heard you can wear whatever you like.
No. To be clear, I'm not basically dead. I can't actually. Well, it's it's
You're
not my
past
community.
that, or before. Yeah, I'm just saying that, like, being 37 is a very tricky age, but
Yeah.
before and after 37, it doesn't
Still
matter.
very, very tricky.
No.
Sure.
No, it's only the age 37
all
is
right,
basically
well.
dead.
Oh, well, then I'm fine.
Yeah. So as long as you're not exactly 37, you're not basically dead. I don't know where that's coming from.
That's fair. That's fair.
Oh, last IAP meeting of the year is pretty great. What if you're 48? Then you're not basically dead.
Hey, Margaret.
Hello, Maggie.
I'm saying hi to everybody today. So if I missed you, say hi again.
I don't think you said hi to Death Star Taco.
I did, but
Oh.
we were both talking, so hi
Well,
again,
I'm
Death Star Taco.
Good at listening.
There's 2 hellos.
That's
I
not
don't.
my
Okay,
job.
N4Nive. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Nanive, maybe. I don't know, but hello, hello. Hi, Krellin. Oh, sorry.
I think it's...
I saw Krellin and I said hello, and don't say hi to me. I'm sorry.
Dude, how's that tea working out for you?
Great.
Cool.
Second one today. Caffeine makes me happy.
It's
Oh,
a
goodness.
good thing. Mango, oh my
Hey,
god,
Bethany.
mango pork. Go.
I've been awake for 30. Go the fuck to sleep.
There's a reason I have that saying.
Don't make me time you out for 24 hours. I will do it.
Ooh. That's so smart.
Is this why I'm streaming, Senpai?
Yes!
Right.
I
Oh,
never
goodness.
thought about that. I can follow through on my threats.
Oh, goodness. Yes, you can. Why didn't that... The button just gave me a warning that it broke. Oh, my
What?
goodness. It's not... Okay, there it is. That was weird.
That's so interesting.
The Stream Deck updated, and it does funny things now.
Oh. I did get mine to make my lights change colors. I'm gonna tweet and...
To change your light colors?
No, because that would just be really mean of me to do. I can just change it from here. I don't need to tweet.
amazing. It's fine.
I can just do it
Yeah,
from
but-
the app, which would, I realize
But I
is,
liked my method.
is really mean because if
Hey, Blade Smoker. Hi,
stuff
WTF is
is-
the new... Trying to do
is
something.
like trying to do work and I just fuck with the lights. That's really mean.
Aw, had to get up at 5 a.m., which is before you go to sleep. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Oh, goodness. No, please, I need nap. Aw. Hi, staff.
Are you napping in the studio? Like, why would, there's no bed in there. I'm hosting the channel, but also
Oh, yeah, I gotta do that,
Taking it.
too.
That's why that's why I'm on my phone. Not because I'm rude, but because I need a host.
Oh, dear. Thank
Look,
you for that, host.
now I'm
Hey,
hosting.
Trooper. Oh, goodness.
I was also going to Twitter page.
Retweet the tweet.
Retweet the tweet. There is a new flat surface. I don't know if it. I
Sorry,
did
Not you. the
checking the
phone.
weight because I was like, oh god, what if this is too heavy? I don't think it should have a full person on it. It could have like a small child on it and it would be okay, but it might max out the weight of the wheels that I put on it. It's fine. I'm not anticipating people lying on my cutting table. Or am I?
Oh my God.
Different kind of
Bye.
cutting.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Can we talk about my pattern some more?
What pattern did you get?
It's a,
Why did you get this pattern?
it's a Star Trek uniform pattern. No
Why
reason.
would you get a Star Trek uniform pattern?
Because I really
Anna?
like Star Trek. Obvi.
And what are we talking about today on this stream?
Star Trek. No, really. What are we talking about today? I don't know. But no, seriously, I got the Voyager DS9 era. I'm so excited. It's fine. It's fine. We don't really need to talk about it. I'm just really excited
We
about
can
it,
talk
okay?
about it.
So one of my wonderful community members gifted this to me off my Amazon wish list, and I'm really excited. It's fine. It's fine.
We are going to talk about your homework because I want to know how the meeting went. Other plans for today. Let me give you the agenda for today's class. Because that's the thing I should put on board. We're going to do a do now activity, which is talking to chat. We are actively doing it right now. That's just like our little warm up, get our brains going. And then like imaginary whiteboard is off screen.
I'm out of tea.
And then we're gonna do our like our talking section. We're gonna have a little bit of lecture. We'll talk a little bit. We're gonna be sharing the homework. So Anna's going to look sad that she doesn't have any tea, and then she's gonna share what her homework was
What was my
and
homework?
how that went. Your first meeting
Oh,
with the
all right,
cast.
yeah.
And then we're
that's
going to. I use a smart board. I like using a document camera whiteboard combo. I genuinely do. It's actually my favorite. I don't like PowerPoints very much, and I don't like overhead projectors are obnoxious. Smart boards, some are really good and some are terrible.
We actually have
Anyway.
a whiteboard around here.
No, it's fine. It's right here. It's off screen. Can't you see it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
yeah. No, obviously. Yeah. No, that's
The
perfect.
whiteboard's right here.
And I can see it through your head too. It's amazing.
Yeah. And then after we talk about your homework, we're gonna talk about a little bit about like first sessions. Kind of like things to think about for a starter session, what that might look like. I think we've touched on it a little bit, so it won't be
All right.
the bulk of it.
Sorry, I need to address what Void Smoker just said because it is patently false. Vulcans wish they were space elves. Sorry, go ahead.
Then Anna's gonna give her thesis presentation about why elves are better than Vulcans, and Vulcans aren't space elves. And then, one of the things I think we were going to touch on today is maybe talking a little bit about NPCs, but we did also talk about like arcs and sort of setting up short and medium and long-term story arcs and kind of how that might look. So I think we're going to start with reviewing the homework and talking about first sessions, and then we'll kind of see how it goes from there. This is the plan. So prepare your butts and your questions. I think that's everything. Okay. Well, that puts it in your court, which is telling me about how the first meeting with your cast went.
It went well.
In more detail than that. I need at least a paragraph response.
Darn it, that's at least 3 sentences.
It is 3 to 5 sentences. You need an introduction sentence, and you need your point, your evidence, and your explanation.
Our meeting went well. We established character ideas and how they integrated together. I'm looking forward to session 0 on Saturday.
Evie, you work with high schoolers. I worked with middle schoolers. I'm lucky if I got 3 sentences out of them to make a paragraph. Cool. So you're at middle school level.
So
right?
seriously, when I was in like high school, I was super underachiever because I was bored out of my mind. But when I went to college, I was like, okay, so what's the maximum number of pages? That was when I entered, I was like, ugh, homework. And then by the time I was done community college, I was like, bring it. Yeah. Sorry. Anyway.
No, that's legit.
I'm a little distractible today.
I've noticed. That's okay. You didn't make popcorn.
Oh, shoot, I forgot. I got distracted.
Sorry, you read this. I was supposed to be unpacking boxes the other day and organizing stuff in my room, and I went, oh, the Stargate RPG system.
Oh, no. Yeah.
I wonder how this works. And I was like, oh, God, it's been a lot longer than I planned.
Yeah, those fun RPG systems. Now, Modifius did that, too, didn't they? Or Stargate, or no?
It's the Spycraft. Whoever made Spycraft.
No,
It's
I
a
don't know.
D20 system.
Okay.
Like, it functionally feels very similar to 3.5. That kind of feel of, because I'm guessing it came out right around the same time. Papers in Symbolic Logic. Fascinating. So, you were distracted. That's fine. You could go
sorry.
make popcorn now.
I could if you want to talk for like 5 minutes by yourself.
We can do it at some point today.
Okay.
It'll happen.
Yeah.
That's fine. I got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So, your first meeting, you talked about, I kind of gave you like some guidelines of things. Do you have anything about like character concepts or how they know each other that you are able to share with the community?
So I don't want to give too much away because I don't feel like that's my place, basically. So let's see. Well, I can contextualize a bit more of the world that we got out of it. for example, there's let's just say there's an organization that is known as Habitats for Halflings. And they go and they build houses for the halfling people that live in the plains, but they're nomadic, so they don't really use them. Incidentally, this is important because what they do use them for is generally the Habitats for Halflings will make several houses, and the halflings will take apart all but one of them, which they turn into a temple for Pastrias. That's right, they make it a bakery. Because halflings love baked goods. But as a nomadic people, they don't really have good access to bakeries in the way. So they use these as waypoint bakeries.
Do they not have like back ovens? Do they
Yeah,
just have a lot of
no.
unleavened bread?
They do that too, but there's certain things that it's better to have a full-on bakery for. So it allows them to diversify their offerings to the great deity Pastrias.
Who halflings the bakeries?
The halflings.
Okay, but like, because they're nomadic people, do they like?
They'll travel among different.
In rest, like, does it like, and then they go to the next one? Why are they nomadic?
Because they're nomadic and they like wandering. Like, that's just. I haven't gotten that far, okay? Are you not at least impressed that I came up with an entire backstory for not only Habitats for Halflings, Pastrias, but also the halfling people?
I'm just asking more questions. Your work is never done. I mean, it is important to know why they're nomadic.
We also figured out where the town that they're going to be at, where most of the campaign is going to take place is, why they're there, and where they came from to get there. In fact, Session 0 is going to be them leaving Cragfall. Cragfall. I haven't quite 100% decided yet. And then getting to Montaigne, the mining village that they're going to. They found this job posting on a big bulletin board that's in Cragsfall, that the area people will go to, and they will post job listings. It's called Craigslist.
Good. This is the sort of world that we will be living in.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So there you go.
See, the explanation, they're migrating to the different ingredients, potentially. You know, migrate to trade. Why did they become so interested in baked goods? Halflings do like food. That is a well-known fact.
Yep.
Is this a specific subset of halflings, or is this the vast majority of the halfling population?
The vast majority of the halfling population in this region, at any rate. You don't have an answer. The correct answer is, I don't know. Let me work on that. I don't know. Let me work on that.
There you go.
Meanwhile, look at all these other impressive things that I've established.
These
wonderful, glorious puns.
So the intention of the group is that prior to the first session, they are going to essentially already be a group of people looking for jobs. Did they decide on already being a group together, or did they decide? Oh, that's probably.
It's just right under the microphone.
Oh, so sorry.
I figured
getting a phone call.
I'm like, oh, hey, that's probably coming up. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Where do the halflings get their ingredients? See, that's a good question. That's a good question.
Is that why they are nomadic, or part of the continued perpetuation of their nomadacy?
I don't know. Maybe there's another organization that does, like, flour for short people. I don't know. I don't know. I'll have to work on that one.
I'm trying to think what that would be.
Powder up their nomadic, because that way they can sell more shoes to their people. Halflings wear out shoes super fast, which is why you always see them barefoot. Funny, but no. Oh, goodness.
Yeah, that was my question. Do they have people manning the stationary bakeries, or when a group leaves, is the bakery, like, empty? Does it, like...
I think that often you'll see different groups of halflings. One will arrive while another is still there, and they'll have a little pastry party, and then the one group will move on. But sometimes they're left vacant, usually with some sourdough getting ready for the next people that come
That would
through.
also, like, if they have these, like, meetings where, like, two groups of halflings come together, they do, like, an ingredient exchange, because, like, some came from one region and some came from the other regions.
Maybe, yeah.
Do they specialize, like, I imagine, like, fresh fruit pastries would be a lot less common, but, like, a lot of canned goods. They're probably really into canning.
Yeah. Except that could get heavy, but...
Are they on foot? Like, do they travel by pony? Do they walk? Do they have carts?
I think I had envisioned them mostly walking, because they're not necessarily taking roads that are firmly established. I would imagine that they've got some sort of paths that have been worn by them over time, but...
Do bags of holding exist in this universe?
Yes, but I don't know.
So maybe,
that
like,
there's gonna be a
one
lot.
group of halflings, like, if you, like, like, they sort of would, because if I imagine if I was a group of, like, 20 halflings traveling on foot, you would all want to be around, like, you would use things to make your life easier. So there's, like, the bag of holding of their community. It's like a communal bag of holding.
I would say probably the more established groups.
Yeah. And so, like, they have the better ingredients. They're the richer ones.
Why would any halfling transition to an adventuring life? It is the goal to find ingredients or some other reason. Maybe. I mean, that's up to the individual halfling, but that's one good reason, yes. Possibly.
Travel by dog. Mithril is lightweight canning. You realize you can in glass, right, Krellin? Like,
I mean...
I guess eventually make, like, tin cans, but...
Yeah, why is it called canning if you mostly do it in glass?
Because I think the jars used to be called cans.
Huh.
And also, calling something jarring
but
means something different.
in between that,
Now I want to Google
they're
why
ball
is it
jars,
called canning.
So why isn't it called balling?
Now I really want to look up, like...
Right? Why is canning called canning?
Why is canning called canning?
Yeah.
But also I need to put my phone, like, on silent.
I am on so many different tangents today.
No, it's fine. So we've established
Yeah.
some more parts of the lore.
Yeah.
Did you think any more about, like, out of curiosity, I guess this would relate to, because are some of your players choosing to play non-humans?
Yes, I'm trying to think. We've got one human. Yeah, we've got one human.
Okay.
And then one mostly human.
Okay. And did that...
That's a thing. Half elves, half orcs aren't necessarily half of one of them. They could be
That's fair.
3/4 or 1/4 or whatever. They could be 1/10, but the aspects happen to... Sorry. Getting distracted because somebody is sending me direct messages on Discord right now. Yeah, it just happens to be that particular portion of their blood manifests more prominently in that particular generation.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah.
Based on that,
Mostly
did you fill in any information about whatever other races those people might be choosing to play?
Yes.
Or species? Is this partly why you have a pretty intense information about halflings?
Possibly.
Okay.
But actually, no, not really. I don't think any of them is a halfling.
Oh, they're
One
making
of them
terrible
is deciding between gnome and halfling, I think, but is, I'm pretty sure, gnome. We have a gnome, we have a human, we have a mostly human, and I'm forgetting what species the fourth one was.
Because we talked a little bit about some of the other species that you were somewhat uncertain of in terms of their place within the world, things like dragonborns and tieflings.
And nobody picked any of those, so I still have to decide, but less urgently.
Okay. related to that, they're an established group beforehand. Are all of them in the same group prior to session 0, or do they meet at the Craigslist bulletin board jobs postings?
We have 2 pairs that know each other, and then some loose connection between them, but then they met at the Craigslist posting board.
So the goal will then be
and
like
they'll all be on
0.
this caravan that's going through the or to the to Montaigne, where they're all going to be. So even if they didn't meet at Craigslist at the exact same time, they're all going to the same place for the same job. So they would figure that out in the 2-3 day journey that it'll take to get from Cragsfall to Montaigne.
So by the time you're hitting session 1, they as a party will have had some time together, but not an extensive amount of time together? Is that sort of the goal?
Yeah, and episode 0, they'll still be feeling each other out, because that's what they're going to be doing in episode 0 anyway, so yeah. And then episode 1 will have them arriving at the start of the main campaign.
Cool. So you came up with... I'm going to look over the list of things that I told you to talk about. So you've got why they're in the town. Did they have... Did you talk about, did they kind of come up with some of their own personal motivations? Do you want to touch on any of the sort of ideas that some of them have without necessarily naming names?
I'll say at least a couple of them are just kind of need the money. And then a couple are kind of sure, that sounds fun. So without getting into the exact intricacies that will hopefully come out over the sessions, I think we've got some pretty solid leads. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about classes? What is this party going to look like, do you think?
I'm trying to remember off the top of my head right now. It's actually going to be pretty well balanced. I think we've got a rogue, we've got a bard. Trying to remember. We should have a cleric, but she's not 100% on that. And then I can't remember the 4th one. Darn it.
Damn, you picking a 4.
What did I miss?
Halflings only eat shortbread.
Oh, goodness. What is this party going to look like? Antagonists. Ugh, yes. Cannings comes from tin cans. Starting prior to that, glass jars were used a bit, but were hard to seal at the time. That makes sense.
Okay.
Huh. I didn't realize it was that new of a thing.
It's an interesting question Masaki's asking is being an adventurer something that you would do because of, you can live off of it, or is it, why do people choose in this world, I guess, to be adventurers and to take these sorts of jobs?
I guess I kind of imagine it being somewhat like Firefly, actually. You're just looking for work to get by. The average person generally is just looking for work to get by. Can you become a wealthy smuggler? Yeah, sure. But is that necessarily the norm? Not really. So there are going to be examples of people that got rich as adventurers, but the common perception is just you do work, you get paid, hopefully.
Anon, thank you for the donation
of
1428. Has a dessert spawned in the world? Will they stay on topic? Have additional deities? I think that was supposed to be desert, but I'm actually going to keep reading it as dessert. Deities been decided upon. Will Pestronas be appeased on stream today? Some of these answers are dubious, but all will be answered this week on Behind the Screens.
Thank you, Anon. Very much appreciated.
Maybe. They might get answered. Thank you. I guess that sort of leads into the sort of a follow-up question of, is adventure, why do people end up in being an adventurer as a way to make money, as opposed to, I'm looking for work, as opposed to, I'm going to go get a job in a factory, or, being a local chicken farmer? What might be the allure of adventuring, as opposed, given its high rate of potential injury and mortality, as opposed to something else?
I mean, obviously there's going to be a lot of reasons for that, but I would say predominantly there is the hope that you're going to succeed and be rich, but a lot of times it's just going to be, well, it's work. And it isn't necessarily, I'm finding adventure and loot and stuff like that, but like in this particular case, they're being hired for a specific job. They're being hired to go and retrieve this particular item. Like, that's what it's going to be. And you don't necessarily, as a person, I wouldn't necessarily look at that and be like, this is an adventure. I'm an adventurer now. You'd look at it more as like, it's a job.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know.
The draw of it may be variable depending on people and what each individual sort of background is, kind of like why you might fall into any other profession. But it's not an economy based entirely around adventuring.
No, definitely not. And Kobold Henchman, thank you for that that donation as well. I'm busy the day the adventurers are supposed to fight me. Sorry, Anna.
It's rough. Sorry, buddy.
I don't blame you.
So that is that a question that you talked about with the players? Why they are specifically in this profession, not just necessarily this specific job?
They all have their reasons.
Okay.
I
don't need it. I was just wanted to confirm that was some part of the conversation you had.
Yeah, I think mostly it comes down to like need to get paid and not entirely. To at least one of them, it's a drive to prove themselves in their own way instead of the way that was set up for them. One of them is more along the lines of getting life experience. And then I think one just wanted to GTFO of where they were. So, like, varying motivations for at least taking this job, and where it leads from there, we'll see.
Cool. And I'm going to keep going down my list. Talked about being collaborative and cooperative. So some of...
Everybody is focusing on the halflings now because I said that they're the primary worshippers of Pistrius.
Yeah.
I should have kept my mouth shut.
Halflings are great. Halflings are my favorite. But also I'm enjoying a lot of the jokes.
Oh dear.
So,
yeah, so adventuring is a lot like being an actor. Got it. Yeah, pretty much.
What were some of the collaboration-related discussions you guys had? I know one of the things that we talked a little bit about is conversations around, like, death, lines and palettes. What were some of the things that you would like, or you can share, or would like to share that came up for you and the players?
We didn't really, actually, I don't think we got to too much of themes that we definitely want to see. We kind of ran out of time with a lot of it, which was kind of expected, but we kind of established some boundaries as far as things that we don't want, but it was pretty much universally agreed across the board what, the certain themes that we don't want to have. So, and you can pretty much guess them. Like, they're the basic, nothing that would require a trigger warning, essentially. I think is a good way of summing it up.
Were there some things that kind of fell into the veil category of, like, I'm okay with this being part of the story, but I wouldn't necessarily want it described?
Yeah, there was definitely a fair amount of that. I don't know. It was pretty much went as one would expect, as far as not like, we're not going to role play sex on camera, that sort of a thing. There wasn't any surprises that I'm like, well, this one thing stands out. So it was, it was pretty uneventful, unfortunately.
What about the flip side of like the expected things you don't want to have, the sort of expected veil things? What are the things that they do want to have in this?
Well, that was what we didn't really get to.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately.
That is probably a good conversation to have in the future. It helps for me to like lay down. Oftentimes players don't really know. It's easier to say things you don't want than things you do want, and like you often are like, oh, I didn't know I wanted that until it happened, or I didn't know I didn't want that until it happened.
we did touch on it a little bit, and like it's clear by all of the characters that have been made that there are certain themes that are going to kind of run throughout, and I think a lot of it is there's probably some social commentary going on in just about all of the characters. So
Really? Wouldn't
yeah,
have guessed with this
no.
particular group.
No, no. It's surprising, I know. It's shocking even. But so we know that certain themes need to be called up and pulled into question and whatnot. It's going to be fun.
Are there any you want to mention?
No.
Okay. That's fine. I'm just curious. Okay, I think those were most of the things that we set up as stuff to talk about before. Do you have any other particular things of note that happened in the first session or in your initial discussion?
Trying to think. It's been a very long few days since then, too. Yeah, I don't think so. We actually did a lot of good world building, which was great to flesh out their backgrounds and the places that they're coming from, and like we built all of Cragsfall basically around the one idea that I had, and then each of them saying, well, I kind of want to be like this person, and me being like, okay, what if we do this with this place, and you're from here, and you work there, and you both want a GTFO.
So were they all established, like, were they all in Cragsfall for a period of time prior to this first session? Were any of them...
For various reasons.
Okay. Are any of them locals?
I think 2 of them are locals. Yeah, I think 2 of them are locals, and then one of them went there looking for work and then couldn't find it in the capacity that they were looking for. And again, trying to remember the third. So, yeah, the third one was there on vacation.
Seems like a great vacation spot.
Yeah. Well, no, Cragsfall actually is known for being kind of like Disney World, where it's like it's very clean and very happy and very pleasant, and people go there for vacation.
So Cragsfall is it's in the mountains, right? Or it's...
Cragsfall is the one that is a combination of Dwarven and Gnomish town. And there's kind of 2 Cragsfalls. There's the one that's like essentially in front of the camera. There's the one that's the tourist destination. Great markets. It's the #1 place to find Dwarven or Gnomish goods. And there's a lot of like
Dwarven goods.
A lot of good.
Sorry. It's from Dragon Age. Just like every time you click on the store, and they're like, it's the same dialogue.
There's a lot of hospitality industry there, and it's designed to cater towards the taller species as well, whereas behind that is not designed to cater towards the taller species. It's, Dwarven and Gnomish height hallways and things like that. So as a taller folk, you would not really be able to get back there. Certainly not comfortably. You would be crawling the entire time. So it is very clear that as a taller species, you don't go there. So it's a little bit of a mystery if you're not from there and a gnome or a dwarf. And that set the tone for a lot of not only their backgrounds and why they're all there, but also really set up that city as something that was kind of like, well, this is where the gnomes and the dwarves live together harmoniously, and fleshed it out to being a rich place where the players may go back to find more adventure and may end up becoming the main city in the campaign.
My question is, do you imagine them ending up back there?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
At some point, yeah. I think between there and the more magic-based city are the two main possibilities for where they'll end up in the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's my... what did you tell the players about the sort of tone and themes before the meeting? Did you send them any information?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't. I was kicking myself for it, but no, I didn't. I didn't have time on one day, and then the other day I was like, crap, and then I really didn't have time. No, I forgot
Happens.
one day. Then I didn't have time. Then I didn't have time. Yeah, that was pretty much it. A little busy. Yeah.
What? You busy?
Yeah,
Never.
right?
I think that goes over your homework. Good job.
And there's another cupcake over on the table.
Excellent. I shall finish grading your homework by eating the second cupcake.
Well, one of those is mine, just so we're clear.
I'm aware of that. I said not the second and third cupcake. I'm just eating the second cupcake, and I'm going to work really hard to not knock this one over. I know. Okay.
They rode here in my backpack, so, you know.
Oh.
She already dropped one.
I knocked it on its side. That's barely dropping it.
Oh, goodness. And now is the time on the show when we eat cupcakes.
Mm-hmm. Hi. I'm gonna make my
oh, hey, you know what I forgot to do? Focus the camera.
weekly worshipping of Pistrius. Mm-hmm.
Can you sit back for a second?
Mm-hmm. You zoomed in on the camera, so now
No, it
it's
doesn't, like it does that automatically. There you
just my face.
go. It'll be back in a second. It's fine. And then we'll have a crosshairs, like, right between us. It's fine. See?
I was gonna start eating the cupcake right when it was that close.
Right? that would have been amazing. It was so close. Oh, dear. Just don't make... What? Do you have issues with monkeys? I'm confused by that one.
This is good cupcake. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The frosting still needs a second batch, but the frosting that I made last week it was enough for 3 dozen cupcakes.
I was like, here, let me see that frosting, girl. Like, here's the frosting.
Oh dear. Bentham's still awake.
Go to sleep.
Was there a green light? Was.
It's gone now.
This was, yeah. I did warn you that there was going to be. Oh, good. Where's your cupcake? Margaret, if you would like to come and visit us,
We'll bribe you with cupcakes. Anytime.
there's a cupcake right here. I'm going to eat this one because I think you're too far away to come and get it. But, I mean, if I have to, I will go home between shows and get another one. There's still more in my
If
apartment.
you show up, we will get you a cupcake.
Yeah.
It will happen.
Yeah. Jumps on a plane. Excellent. I was actually planning on baking more tomorrow because we still have frosting. So anyway, I think now is probably a good time if people have questions.
Questions about first sessions, meetings, things like that. I think we'll touch a little bit on like how you're setting up without too many spoilers, but kind of like some basic setup premise. Do you just need to hold that like a blanket? Like it's your security blanket now?
While your mouth is full, we're going to be doing a fundraising event on the 26th. I don't think I've said that on camera yet. I don't think anyone's said that on camera yet. So that's like, I just don't want to keep forgetting. I want to give everybody a warning as much ahead of time because season break is bad for our bank account. Shocking. But we do need to run another fundraising event. We're probably going to need to do one roughly every season, and we can't do it in June because half of us are gone.
I'm one of those.
Me too.
I'm gonna be in England. Maggie's question:
I'm going
how
to
much?
be in New England.
Hey, I was like, I don't know if it's better. How much information do you prefer to divulge to your party before session 1? For me, a lot of that depends on how unique the world is. So like if I've done a lot of world building and there are things that I feel like they should know as a person who lives in that world, then I want to ensure that they have as much of that information. I do like to try and set up some expectations about like themes and tone. I also want us to like kind of talk collaboratively about things that we want to see, and things that we don't want to see in that session. But a lot of it depends on how much I think it's important for them to not know something versus know something. And also some of it is I try and I want the world building process to feel collaborative. So if I tell them everything about the world, then they can't take any ownership of it. And that was something I think, like running in a setting like Shadowrun, a lot of us struggled with, where we're like literally playing the game with the creator of the game behind us, and you feel a little bit like you're not allowed to create your own things about this world when that's the case, as opposed to playing like Leviathan, where I'm like, I literally made this up, and if y'all want to make up an alien race, that alien race exists now. There's a race of tiny lions and giant lions. They exist. I did not create them. Tony created them, and then I yes-anded the shit out of it. So I think I try and always put telling my players stuff in the perspective of what is something they should know as their character. I don't like to rely on players remembering things that their characters would remember, because players are a person and then they're playing a character. The character is only themselves. So the character doesn't have the burden of existing as two people. So theoretically, the character should be able to remember things that the player might not. So I never want to rely on players having taken notes, players remembering things. I think it's really nice when players do, and I do have some expectation that they're paying attention. But that is a personal thing for me. Like, you are two people, and I don't expect you to remember two full people's worth of information. If I think your character should know it, then I will just tell you. You don't need to make a roll. Like, you don't need to check that. Question about the deity of baked goods who opposes Pistrius.
Baked bad.
Baked bads. Baking bad? Is that our... Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Where, is it somewhere in chat?
Baked bad.
Oh, the deity of baked bads who opposes... Oh, is there a baked bads? Is... I believe the eel day is pastramius. Pastrami is delicious.
Disgusting. I don't
you
eat
insult
meat.
me and my heritage. No,
I don't eat meat,
That's fair. Now I want like a parody version of the show Breaking Bad, which is Baking Bad, and it's just set in this world, and it's
oh
like
my goodness,
this,
no.
This group of like evil halflings that like go around setting fire to bakeries.
Remember how we talked about doing creative baking streams, making a show out of it?
Baking Bad.
Yes.
And we wear lab coats, and everything's blue.
I was thinking it would still be like the Great British Bake Off, except the Great Geek Space Bake Off. But we could call it Baking Bad.
That'd be pretty
still
good.
Still judge how terrible everybody's baked goods are.
That'd be pretty good. How do you handle mystery? That can vary a lot on your players, and that I think is something that's really different between a streamed performance RPG and a home game. Because I have much higher expectations going into a streamed home game. A streamed like performance, that they are going to be able to separate player knowledge from character knowledge. Because I'm often dealing with actors and improvisers. Like, when you're doing an improv show, I am backstage when the villain is divulging their evil plot on stage. And I have to, as a character, pretend that I didn't hear that the villain just divulged their evil plot on stage. So I am less cautious about avoiding spoilers or not telling them information. Especially when I think it's important that I'm like, we gotta hit a narrative beat. So like I set up a narrative beat at the beginning of season 3 of Leviathan that's gonna come up, and I'm like, we gotta hit this beat, meaning Lizzie, your character's gonna have to do X. And like, we're gonna need to go to this place, so your character's gonna need to get us there.
Is Baking Bad a show about baking pot brownies in a state where it's still illegal?
No, but we could totally just bake pot brownies. It'd be super legal here. I actually know how to do it. They don't
Really?
taste great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I lived in a hippie house for a long time, and they taught me how to infuse butter with THC.
Mm.
And then you just bake with that butter.
I
THC bonds to fats.
I
Fun
had
fact.
somebody that, because I've never tried it. I had somebody back in Boston that was like dying to make pot brownies with pot oil, because apparently you can infuse oil
Yeah.
instead of butter. And because I was, at the time, I thought I was very, very lactose intolerant. Turns out I'm just lactose intolerant and allergic to a slew of things. But so they wanted to make me ones that I could have just so I could try it. And I'm like, well, I could. I just don't really want to. I'm just not really interested. So anyway.
Yeah. Essentially, the key important of baking with THC is that it bonds to fats. So whatever you're baking with needs to have some sort of fat in it. Which means fatless sponges can't be special. There's no fat for them to bond with.
Can't be special. So anyway.
Sorry. I'm gonna go up. There
Today
were
is
like
the day of
actual.
tangents.
Oh God, where? How do I help me? Help me,
I'm
senpai.
trying.
Okay.
What percentage of things like places, names, inventions, and the like do I expect to be punny? Not really that much. Like I gave you the 2 that we came up with in the entire like planning phase.
Craigslist.
So, yeah, Craigslist and I mean, houses for halflings, homes for halflings isn't really like it's not a pun. It's just funny.
A lot of that for me.
I mean,
and punniness and like coming up with those is that sometimes I just come up with themes for naming because I'm really bad at names. And so like with the sci-fi show, a lot of my themes are take a modern thing and transpose it into the future. So like Transparalim is the operating system because it is transparent aluminum windows. Like that's my thought process. And so like I get a word Transparalim, which is like that could be a future word.
That's fair.
I feel like there was one more question I missed.
Okay.
DD poses.
They can ask it again.
But what if they important? No. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, no angel food cake that gets you high.
I will say, if you want to ask a question, either say question to start it off, or Anna or Lauren somewhere in the text of your question. Otherwise, we may not see it.
Yeah. Yeah, Trooper's comment is a similar one. Like, the player character lives their life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, unless you're operating on tritium years, in which case they live their life 100 tritium hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
Did the math for that one. So I, like, for me, and that's just something that I think is very important. Like, they don't, it's a personal preference, but I really try to remind myself that I'm like, players should just know this shit. Like, they don't need to roll. And that's okay. It's okay to not always have to roll. They can just know things. Your sponge is special. Don't judge my fat. I was just saying, you need fats to bond to the... Now, you could take the devil's food cake, you could put it in the frosting. You could bond using the fat in the frosting.
Oh, that's a recipe for disaster.
But you also then run into problems like if you're... This is me drinking the
I know.
face on the
So
bottom.
anyway,
Are you going to have Rocky Talkies or Speaker Stones? I don't remember who came
they're
up
not
with the
gonna
name
be
Rocky Talkies, but
too
there's
common, but yeah.
definitely, I did not come up with that one on my own. I just really enjoyed the word Rocky Talkie. It's a brand of Speaker Stone.
Yeah. So, Margaret asks, when planning for sessions, do you feel that there should always be a certain amount of combat encounters? For instance, it is recommended that you have 6 to 8, which has always seemed way too many. Yeah,
Who gets through 6 combat encounters in 4 hours? Like, even on a home game, I couldn't do it that
games,
fast.
like, at least when I played D&D when I was younger, it would be like a 12-hour day.
Okay.
So, but even then, we wouldn't get through 6 to 8 encounters.
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe Margaret meant, like, no, I don't even know. I don't even know. That's an entire season of encounters to me, and then some, possibly.
Yeah,
like,
even when I was
very RP heavy as well in the way I want to do
even
stuff,
when
so.
I wasn't running RP games, RP heavy games, I feel like we normally got through 3 encounters. Like that was a pretty standard, like a 4-hour session, 3 encounters, and I. 3 is like there's a kind of a 3 is a magic number for a reason. There's like a sort of a good feeling behind it, and so even when I think about encounters now more broadly, in like encounters are narrative beats. Like here's a thing, here's a thing, here's a thing, and there's like a few things that'll tie them, but the encounter is essentially the challenge that you are going to present to the players that they're going to have to solve, and you can think about that in more vague terms or more specific terms. We'll talk a little bit more about designing encounters. But generally, I like to try and aim for 3 things in a session because it normally feels good. Like you're getting some stuff done. There's also often like the kind of the rule of 3, which is like the comedy rule, which is like you do the joke and then you come back to it and then you do it the last time, and like that's how many times something's funny. Oh, it's per adventure day. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it really depends on if you want to, how detailed your adventure day is going to get. I think that's for balancing it, because the expectation is that the players should be able to get through a certain number of encounters before they heal. But when you think about doing a show, a day doesn't have to be a single session. Or even when you do a home game, like your adventuring day can be like 3 sessions, and so you just keep being like, no, y'all didn't get to heal between this session and the last session, and there's nothing particularly wrong with doing that. Like your entire first story that you sort of told me could functionally just be 1 adventure day, and like they will not get to heal or take a long rest. They'll get their short rests, and that's about it. And that's part of why I think D&D has those 2 different pieces of it, because resources are something you have to manage in Dungeons and Dragons as a player. You have to manage your spell slots, your rages, and like it's particularly hard on spellcasting classes as opposed to non-spellcasting classes. Because I'm like, as a monk, I had to manage 4 key points. As a caster, I have to manage all my spell slots, and then I'm useless.
And they've made it a lot better with making cantrips more powerful, because you can cast cantrips as much as you want. That's makes a world of difference for spellcasters. The fact that when I run out of spell slots as a spellcaster, I can still do Firebolt or whatever, and that's 1d10 of damage. That's not insubstantial. At the very least, it's like, it can be a lot of damage. So they've done a lot with that to make it not useless, to make them not useless. Because what good is a glass cannon that's out of ammunition?
Yeah, I've been that character before.
Right?
I think I played a 3/5 cleric, and I was like hoarding my spell slots because I'm like, you're gonna need healing, and that's all I can do with them. And so I'm like, I hit it with my quarterstaff, and I'm like, I'm so fucking bored. That's how I feel. So
I would say that's one of the reasons that I like 5th edition versus any of the other editions, is because of that. Is because they've thought, hey, you know what makes this stuff boring, and how do we fix it?
And I think having a certain amount of resources to manage can be good, because it is another challenge that the players have to have. It is something where they have to think about, they're like, is this something I should do now, or should I maybe try a different approach to it? Especially with spellcasting, you're like, should I roll this crazy powerful spell, or should I try a different approach to solving this problem, because I don't know if I'm going to need this spell later. There's nothing wrong with having a lot of combat in a game. There's also nothing wrong with having very little of it. D&D is biased towards having combat, because that is what the vast majority of characters' abilities are focused around. But that doesn't mean they can't do other things. You just you'll find kind of your groove on that. But yeah, I would say in planning a single episode, I aim for 2 to 3 things to happen. Because we do 3-hour episodes here, it tends to be closer to the 2. When I do a 4-hour episode or a 4-hour session, you can get closer to the 3. And that's just something that I've feeled out having done 3-hour sessions as opposed to 4-hour. But I try and aim for that too in home games. That was always my, it was always the mini encounter, the second one, and then the ending. That was always the structure.
So, Pumpkin was asking about illnesses and persistent curses, things that last more than 1 combat in your games. Do you like them? Just not in the show format, or not at all? I would say, it has to be narratively relevant. If somebody's just going to have a cold, then, then if they want to RP having a cold, I'm fine with that. But otherwise, it's going to take like a healing word to get rid of it. For mundane illnesses, but but if it's not mundane, then it is probably narratively relevant. Or if like they've got a character that has low constitution and they want to roleplay being sick all the time, then that becomes narratively relevant again. So I think for me, at least, that's what that comes down to.
Similarly, I think about it kind of like a lot of like the minor stuff, like that's a character's choice. If they want to role play that, I'm not going to apply like in-game penalties or bonuses to them necessarily. Generally, I like to kind of have a sort of a karmic balance. If I do something shitty to someone's character, they're also going to get something out of it in return. Like, and sometimes it's, in some systems, it's easier to do. Like, if you're in a system where it's, like, karma or XP based, where they just spend it as their choice, you can just literally be like, you get some extra XP because I'm essentially giving you, like, OVA is a good example. There are weaknesses and there are advantages that you get in the system. And so I could be like, I'm going to give you a weakness, but you can get, like, 5 XP and buy yourself an advantage with that. And that's if it's permanent. If it's a temporary thing that it's part of the story for them to work themselves out of, then they just have to deal with it until they figure out the solution to their problem, and that's because it's narratively important.
Yeah. Am I going to go with the standard 1 hour short rest or 8 hour long rest, or use the gritty realism option? All right, I'm going to stop there because to where I thought that question was going is reducing the amount of time. Like, because I'm thinking about possibly having a short rest be a half an hour, and a long rest is probably like 6 to 8 hours. Like, the long rest is going to be a little more situational, I feel like. I don't think it used to be. I think that's a common house rule started with Critical Role.
I thought at some point, I actually swear, short rests at one point were 10 minutes. Perception. I feel like there was
maybe like 4th edition.
I think it was in 4th
because I never played 4th.
There was a version where short rests were 10 minutes because you could like realistically do a short rest without feeling like you were all putting yourself in danger.
Yeah. And that's why I kind of feel like a half an hour.
I'm not crazy. Krellin, thank you. They were 10 minutes. Okay. And like it makes sense because like functionally when you're like, well, we're just gonna sit here for an hour or 30 minutes and you're just sort of like, okay. Like we're just gonna take a short rest. Like we're literally doing like, I always with long rests. I always basically do. I'm like, it's got to be a reasonable night's sleep. Like you should be able to sleep it off. And so I'm like, if most people can sleep 6 to 8 hours, so if you get about 6 hours, you're probably good. Yeah. 4th was fascinating. It was. I liked some of it. They went very much down that feeling you get out of some indie RPGs that have like playbooks for characters, where characters all have a very similar feeling with like a few abilities that sort of delineate them. And for better or for worse, that's essentially what they did, is that everyone's character looked the same. Everyone had at-will abilities. They all had abilities they recovered after a short rest, and then abilities you recovered after a long rest. And that was it. Like everybody had that. It's just the way they arranged looked differently. And so there was a lack of sense that classes felt different, because functionally like a wizard and a barbarian actually felt very similar, because the barbarian still had at-will abilities and like much like a cantrips versus spell slots. Yeah. But in other ways it was nice because you could go from playing one class to another class without really thinking about it too much. And yeah, they upped a lot of the pacing of it, and they were super mini tactical. Like, the way all of your abilities played, like, you had to play with the map on 4th edition.
What I think will be really, really interesting is when they come up with 6th edition. Because 5th was made before Critical Role, right? Yeah. So before RPGs, tabletop RPGs became popular on Twitch, which is driving this sort of tabletop RPG renaissance in a lot of ways. So, or at least pulling it more mainstream. Obviously, the industry has existed for ages. It's not going to be made or broken by one thing. But you see what I'm saying? Like, as a broadcaster of several years now, it always interests me how the industry is changed by YouTube and Twitch and services like it. And the tabletop industry is no different.
So. No, it's definitely, there's been some changes. But 4th edition was very interesting. That was the one that I played a very little bit of 3.5 and then a lot of 4th. I ran a campaign in 4th, and then I moved to 5th when that came out. And like I didn't dislike 4th. It got a lot of bad rap because it was so different. And I too will be interested to see what future revisions look like from that game. I think the end of the day, you can house rule whatever the fuck you want with a lot of stuff.
And should. Like, in most cases, I feel like you play the game that you want to play, and if it's almost the system that you want, then house rule it. And if it's not the system that you want, then play something else.
So that is an interesting thing to maybe think about, is changing what short and long rests look like, and potentially even just defining it not by a strict amount of time, but by simply narrative. Like, do you have enough time for your characters to safely stop for enough time to gather your breath and take a rest? And you don't have to say that is 30 minutes, that is 10 minutes, that is an hour. You can just be like, do you have enough time to do this? Do you have enough time to sleep and get enough sleep? And that might be what I would think about doing it.
And even so far as like saying, okay, this night you can get by a long rest out of 4 hours, but tomorrow night you're going to need at least 6, and the following night you're going to need at least 8. Like, you can't consecutively be like, nah, 4 hours is great.
But like,
and
also
still get
potentially
all of your spells.
You could be like, well, tonight you're staying in a super schwanky digs and it's nice and the beds are comfortable, and like, yeah, a 6-hour long rest is gonna feel really great because you slept really nicely.
Yeah, you
as
fell
opposed
right
to, like,
asleep. You didn't have to keep watch.
You were sleeping in the room right above the bar and you didn't get to sleep for like several hours. So like that, I think the short rest is like sitting. Can you snack? It's what you do. I imagine a short rest is like if you go for a hike, your short rest is what you do when you reach the top and you're done, and like everybody sits down and you have your snacks and like you drink some water and you sort of chill out. That's your short rest. And then your long rest is when you come home and you pass out.
Yeah.
So I think
I'm
also
confused by your question, Frithia. If they keep resting for 4 hours, are they going to have accidents where they lose, say, a toe? I'm Captain America in this instance. I don't understand that reference.
I don't either. I feel like I'm missing something.
No.
I suspect a new edition of Dungeons and Dragons is gonna be a while, but it'll happen eventually. That's part of their business model.
Yeah,
they've got plenty more to milk on.
Because 5th edition works really, really well. It works well for streams, and there's a lot more content that they can put out for 5th.
Yeah, they're not in a need to make a new one.
Yeah.
But making new editions is part of their business model. So at some point it'll probably happen.
Yeah.
I had a thought, and I was gonna say something, and I don't remember what it was, and I'm gonna scroll up slightly to see if it jogs my memory.
And while you're doing that, N4, I'm going to say my name is Anna, so your question isn't tagging for that reason, and I'm not really sure what you're asking. You might want to maybe try rephrasing it. Maybe you understand it a bit better.
Where's the question? Oh. Do you know yourself in episode 0's DM?
The Return of Thaco, yes.
How much did you prepare? How much do you know, I guess, like, how much do you prepare in the first episode? How much do you have of a plan of an entire sort of long-term story?
For episode 0, not a lot, because I haven't really had time to figure that out. So a lot of it is going to be improvised. But to me, the episode 0, in this case, is about getting them to the location that I want for episode 1, and giving them the opportunity to feel out their characters, make sure that they can adjust anything they want to adjust, or if absolutely necessary, throw out their character entirely. But that would be very much frowned on.
It's not
and
ideal.
And then feel each other out, feel what the dynamic is going to be on that.
Mm-hmm. So from my end, a lot of it depends. I try and always keep in mind how. I like to have a long-term goal, and sometimes that long-term goal is very, like, I know what's happening, and sometimes that long-term goal is kind of ephemeral, like, more theme like, oh, like we're going to deal with this evil alien monster. Like that, long-term goal is they're gonna hopefully not have the galaxy die from this evil alien monster. But I'm like, I have, and then the closer we get to the short term, that's like my specific. So I'm always like, this episode, what is the goal by the end of the episode? The goal is they get an item. The goal is they discover this piece of information. The goal is they have this experience. They learn this thing. Like what do I want them to get out by the end of an encounter? Not necessarily. It's not necessarily the episode, because I have had very, very frequently I will write and I will get to use that material for 3 weeks. They work slower than I always think they're going to, but I'm getting better at it. You will get better.
But then sometimes you will write and they will go through that in 5 minutes because they went in a totally different direction.
Yeah, I've almost never experienced that. I say this now, like I've almost never experienced like writing something and having that like that material be useless. Like I have once had to say to a player like, no, we can't do this during downtime. There was a lovely example during Shadowrun was Claudia was like, during this downtime, my character is going to break into a police station and steal this box of evidence. And I looked at her and I went, I'm sorry, your character is going to break into a police station in downtime and you don't think we're going to need to do some rolls for that? So I told her no, she wasn't allowed to. So
remember, yes and or no but.
But I did turn that into a later session, which was lovely.
So there you go. No but.
So I would say because of the way I plan, which is largely you have a problem and the problem doesn't go away. So they have to solve the problem. What ends up happening is that all of the ways I thought they would solve the problem are not the ways they end up going about it. And that's me generating stuff on the fly. But like normally the list of problems is a longer list of problems than an actual episode ends up taking up. But that's a lot of the approach of planning a specific episode, and might be a good one for the next stream of like, how do you sit down and create a session?
Yeah.
What does a encounter arc look like? Also, hello, Eric. How do you recruit for your games? Oftentimes I tell my friends that I would like them to be part of the game, and then they say yes. But normally I'll try and put together
we're
a basic
really
pitch.
lucky because we're in Seattle and everybody here is geeky and into geeky things like tabletop RPGs. So you can pretty much assume that just about anyone you ask is some degree of interested.
Yeah. But I normally approach with like, I want to run the game, this is the system that I want to use, or I don't know what system I want to use. This is the type of game that I want to run, this is the setting, and this is kind of its feeling. So I think like Leviathan, I was like, I want to run a space opera, I want it to be like a big sort of large scope story, I want you to be characters that maybe are reluctant heroes, but will be kind of heroic characters. Are you interested in being part of that? And that can be verbal, that can also be written. When I've done like online games, I've been like, I want to run a D&D game, like, do you want to be part of this?
For me, it's which one of my cast members do I not feel like is already doing too much? And sometimes it's even well, maybe them too.
I just volunteer a lot.
Yeah.
To do a lot of things.
Yeah. And remember to put question, Anna or Lauren, into the question. It makes it a lot easier for us to see. Please. I
think there were some other...
Oh, there were definitely some other ones.
Other things. There was something about, like, more about kind of campaign sort of first, like, setup stuff, but I definitely... lost all of that. It went out of the window. Never mind. Hi, everybody. This is my reset I learned recently, is that when I'm like completely blanking and my brain just turns off and then just like restarts, it's like, hi, welcome to GeekSpaceTV. You're watching Behind the Screens, a show about playing and running tabletop roleplay games. My name is Random Tuesday, and I am an expert because I've done this before. And I'm here to help Anna, who is not an expert, because she hasn't done this in a while. And so a lot of what we were talking about here on the show is preparing you to run a D&D RPG show on this channel, and then also thinking about different ways of running RPGs, of playing in RPGs, and also some of the differences between what you might do in a home game versus what you might be doing when you're streaming a game. Like we talked about, eventually we're going to just do an episode on like the technological side of it.
Yeah, we talked about that right
really
before
know.
the show. Because that is where I am the expert, is how to do the back end of it all. So yeah.
Campaign story arcs. That was, I think, what we were talking about. So I always try and think about like the short-term goals and be very kind of specific on those. And then the further out you get, the less specific your goals need to be. I like to have something that I'm sort of pitching everything towards, and maybe it's a big bad and what they're doing. Maybe it's some large event that's going to happen or not going to happen depending on the actions of the PC. But typically, unless you're playing a like super crazy heroic story, especially in D&D, where you're starting at level 1, your characters aren't going to go destroy Breaking Bad, the D&D of evil baked goods. Like, that's not going to be your first story arc. So I might have an idea of what the eventual big bad would be for something like that when they hit level 15 or level 20, however sort of far ahead we're pitching. But in the short term, I would really just think about, like, what's the shit that they're going to deal with between, like, level 1 and 3? And, like, I would sort of be like, there's going to be what's my milestone marker for when I feel like they hit, like, they're in the sort of semi-heroic territory now. And then I would have a pretty solid idea for the beginning, middle, and end of what I'm going to have them do on screen in the first few episodes. So where do you feel like you're at with that kind of process? I mean, we've talked a little bit about this, but...
Yeah, I mean, like, they're starting the episode 0 at level 1, but episode 1, they'll be at level 2. Mm-hmm. So that's that right there.
So, yeah.
I do feel that I need to flesh out, like you were saying, what I've got planned so far could ostensibly happen in the span of a single day. And it's like, I really need to stretch out and flesh out what I've got planned for them so far. Which is just something that requires time and coming up with a good plot line. I have a back end, like, I have an overarching plot that happens in the background over a long span of time. I need to figure out ways to tell stories around it beyond just that initial day or few days. So, yeah.
And that's actually a strategy I use a lot too, is the background. Like, your job as the GM is to manage the world state, and some systems like allow you to very explicitly manage the world state through the system. But others, in my case, or in other systems, like, that's sort of less explicit. So I always try and think about, like, if I imagine what's the goal of the big bad or whatever is happening in the background, what are their milestones? Like, what's their first goal? Like, and it's basically, they're much like the players. They have a problem and they need a solution to their problem. They have a bunch of mini problems on the way to their final goal, and how do they solve those problems? And then my job is to think about how would that impact the players or the world the players exist in. Is it that they're, like, an example, evil person wants to just, like, take over the country, and they're doing that by a military campaign, raising an army, and that army is going to go through a town, and the players will, a few days later, end up at this town and have to discover what's happened when someone's just had a bunch of army people running through their town. And so that's sort of an example of the world state affects what the players experience. One of the things to keep track of is, like, managing the world state can get very overwhelming. So I pretty much only ever think about what are the things that would directly impact the NPCs. Like, for example, the Rays are doing a bunch of shit. I know that they're doing some terrible things, but I'm pretty much only worrying about the things that they're doing that directly affect the players. Like, I worried about the fact that they sent a scout ship to destroy Janus Landing. They've sent a bunch of other scout ships. I don't know where those are yet. They'll only know where they are if it's important to know. So that's that's one of the ways, like, manage it by thinking about where the players are, would the story have affected them. And that can also be a live process too, where you're like, long term, this is their goal, this might be a step that they're doing for it. You don't need to know all of the steps. You can just be like, well, the players are going through this town. Would this town have been impacted in any way by the events that are happening in the background?
Yeah.
How excited were the players about the pastry deity?
They weren't really. They were
What?
nowhere near as excited as all of you.
They're terrible.
No,
Fire all of them.
No, well, okay, but then we don't have a D&D show. Well, we'll see. Scheduling is complicated.
Scheduling
all
is
right?
complicated.
Scheduling is really, really complicated. How budget or magical adventuring items like magic weapons or magic armor, are they available in stores? Some stores, yeah. There's particularly as you get closer to the more magic-focused city, there's going to be more of a prevalence of magical item stores in general. But they're not like magical adventuring item stores necessarily. They're magical item stores, which means that's where you go and get your new mixing spoon or your new sword +1 or whatever. So not terribly uncommon, but every major city would have at least a couple. Everybody wants you on all the things. That's no surprise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Someone also mentioned asking about how I structure notes. I'll probably go into that a little bit more specifically when we talk about structuring the actual encounter. And I will always preface this with, it works for me. It may not work for you. A lot of people are visual as opposed to verbal, as opposed to something else, and everything is a little bit different.
Well, things like control weather have far-reaching effects. There's rain here now, but it causes drought to the south for a few weeks. I'm not really planning on that sort of a thing, personally. It's magic, just kind of does its thing. It doesn't shift the weather pattern so much as, yep, there was a rain cloud. I think that can mostly be hand-waved. It's like, now if you're casting control weather and making it rain all day long every day for a month, then one, you're probably going to have an adventuring group sent after you, and two, it is going to have a at least temporary impact on the environment because you're drowning it. So I think, again, it comes down to, is it narratively relevant?
Mm-hmm.
And generally speaking, that probably isn't going to be a thing.
Pumpkin, I think we talked about that. You sort of presented the way the protagonists, I should say, fit within this world as adventurers. They're more of the D-list or C-list. They're probably going to start at like F-list and then maybe work their way up to C-list.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
While there are other adventurers that might be doing really high-profile things that would change the fabric of the world, they are going to be changing the world in their mostly immediate vicinity, maybe, probably, sometimes.
Yeah. And if they're lucky, maybe they'll get to save the world, but nobody will realize it was them.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, if your question, in terms of other ways to structure stories, there are a lot of different ways you can structure stories. The big bad and like sort of major events, like what in that case, it's really like the antagonist and their objectives, whatever the antagonist happens to be. That's a more of a structure that comes from heroes' journeys and like operas and things like that, where it is a sort of large, sweeping, big scale story that the characters are doing something in, and those tend to be what happens in one episode carries on to the next episode. An episodic story would be really like, it's hard to do in an RPG because often RPGs take a long time, but it's essentially the events of what happened in this particular episode pretty much only happen in this particular episode and don't really have any impact on any future or past events. You can also have much more of a sandbox where you'll have, in that case, sandboxes, the more sandboxy it is, the more you're managing the world state, because you need to have a rough idea of what's happening around the characters to create things that would be interesting for the characters to engage with, and things that would impact each other. And so, like, Stars Without Number has you essentially set up a sector and create factions in the sector, which are the groups that all have their individual goals and are all doing things, and the players may intersect with them. Yeah, so as Trooper points out, like, episodic used to be a really popular style of television and was super common and is still mostly seen more in, like, comedies, like comedy shows, as opposed to dramas. We've gone towards much more series storytelling as opposed to episodic storytelling. But there's nothing wrong with either of them, and episodic can be a really nice way to do a long-term ongoing campaign of unknown length. Like, and episodic also doesn't mean that they're not going to encounter big bads, but it's normally like here's an example. My Little Pony is a good example of a show that is episodic but still has big bads. What they basically do is every episode has a different story, and there's the different moral of friendship that they learn, and some of those events will carry on. Like, the changes that the characters undergo still impact them in a later story. And then, like, your last 2 or 3 episodes of the season, they will do a 2-part episode, and there will be a big bad. And the events and the things that big bad does will carry on through and affect events in the future story, but they essentially resolve the big bad in 1 episode. Or Sailor Moon, Celestial Rangers, those are examples of, like, functionally they're episodic, but there is still a villain out there that's doing things. And it's a perfectly valuable way of telling a story.
That's somewhere between valuable and valid. Valuable.
Yeah. I don't think they're going to be protagonists, Alyssa, but you hope for that.
I'm hoping for it too, but we'll see. Protagonists don't have to be heroes.
That's true. Making rain.
Yeah, exactly, Death Star Taco. If you were making it rain for months on end to improve your rice harvest, someone may be sent to teach you the arrows of your ways. Yeah. Yep.
What's the best ratio of dungeons to dragons? 1 for 1. You want 1 dragon per dungeon. But, fun fact, 1 dragon is roughly equivalent to, like, 50 kobolds. So you can put kobolds in your dungeons.
Kobolds played right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, depending on the age category of the dragon, yeah.
So there are many different ways you can structure stories. I was thinking about talking about NPCs today, but I feel like we're talking about structuring narratives today. So let's just keep talking about that.
That's fine.
Other questions or thoughts? How many heads is too many for a monster to have? There's no answer to that. You can have 0, and that's perfectly acceptable. 1 dragon is 30 truckers kobolds. I'm looking for one of my other lists. I have not organized this notebook.
I will say that now that I'm familiar with Tucker's kobolds, to me, Dragon Mountain kobolds were my version of Tucker's kobolds, or Dragon Mountain kobolds. And I will say that basically they're just really, really cunning. You should look it up. For anybody that isn't familiar with what Tucker's kobolds are, look up the story, because it's really interesting. Kobolds are generally seen as a really, really weak enemy that is just fodder, right? But they're actually average intelligence, which means they're on par with any of the other humanoid species that are out there intelligence-wise. And they know that they're weak physically, so they make traps. They're known for being cunning and for being trap builders. So if they have been in an area very frequently, and in particular in the case of Tucker's kobolds, an area that adventurers frequently go through, they have built a nest of death. And ideally, they're waiting to spring it until the adventurers are on their way back out. But often, they're not going to let them just pass through, because when they're on their way out, they're also probably more powerful. But, yeah. So it's basically, Tucker was this guy that made this dungeon, and the first level of the dungeon was the most lethal, because it was full of kobolds. And so the players were terrified of it, and they managed to get through it and dive down this hole that took them far deeper in the dungeon than they had intended to go for a long time. And they managed to survive down there and be okay, and then eventually they got to the point where they needed to leave. And the strategist of the group was in tears about it, because he knew that they had to go back through the first level. They had to go back through the kobolds to get out. Like, that's how bad. So now, I'm not planning on making it that bad, but I am a fan of kobolds. I'm a fan of any species, particularly monstrous species, not being what is the default in your average home game of Dungeons and Dragons. Because I did that for a very long time. I'm bored with it. And I think a lot of other people are too. I think now is a good time to be exploring what these things say in their descriptions instead of just throwing them at the party and letting them die. So
I think that's also an interesting piece, because often players, and that's something that you encounter in Dungeons and Dragons more so than any other game, I think, is that players have expectations. When you're like, this is a goblin, players like know things. Like, players know how many hit points goblins have. Like, they or not necessarily, but like, I think I mentioned it at some point in Right Click, and like, I was like, oh, how many hit points? And I had to look it up. And Megan's just like 7. And I'm like, you've done this before. Like, you have an expectation. You know what that stat block looks like. And so something to be cognizant of, which I think you already are, is like, how do you turn that on its head in a way that doesn't feel unfair to players? Because if you like present them with a goblin and you're like, this goblin has 500 hit points, they're going to be like, what? That's not fair. Like, they go in with a certain amount of expectations, but how do you walk the line of subverting the expectations while not just like giving them a giant middle finger?
Yeah.
And often that's where I go into I'm just going to make my own thing. That's somehow none of the things that you've seen before, or like a combination of things you've seen before, so you're not 100% sure what to expect.
So my own version, Dragon Mountain, was this box set in 2nd edition that was like, I would say a third of the adventure was outside of it getting to this mountain that mythically appeared once every like 30 years or something like that. But once you were in, the mountain was full of kobolds. But 2nd edition had expanded it so much at that point that you could very easily give class levels to monstrous creatures. And so a lot of the kobolds had classes. They had been in that mountain for centuries with a dragon at the top. So they had built their nest for a very long time, and it was a very, very lethal adventure box set. But in particular, there were some kobolds that had lots of levels that were on par with they were boss fights. So yeah, but they did a good job of setting you up for that. You didn't immediately encounter the highest level kobold in the dungeon. You started with more tame that weren't quite what you would normally expect, because they were kobolds by the book. They had set traps. They reset traps given the opportunity, and used their natural advantages to good effect. So yeah.
So yeah, building monsters is fun. If you were asking, I think you mentioned at some point about, again, with the storytelling, not to confuse with when I was talking about sandbox and episodic, those are actually kind of two separate things. So it's normally your spectrum of sandbox to narrative, which is essentially how much do you just like put your players in something and let them run around and do whatever they want, versus how much do you kind of guide them on a story from beat to beat, from moment to moment. Those aren't necessarily tied to your long-term campaign and what you might be doing over an extended period of time or shorter period of time. So you've got kind of the sandbox narrative spectrum, and then you've got your sort of serial episodic spectrum. And episodic is where what happens in a single event or in a single episode, which, as a reminder, may take place over several sessions of an RPG, but essentially a single event, more or less stays within that event and doesn't massively impact what happens before or after. And then you have your serial, which is that what happens in this episode directly impacts what happens in the next episode, and so on and so forth. So it's more of a spectrum of sandbox and narrative and serial and episodic, and you can have a narrative episodic show where you are still telling a long-term story, but what happens in a single episode kind of resolves in a single episode. My Little Pony is very much like that. It is a long-term narrative story. They're being pretty much driven on it. It's not the ponies exploring the world, right? Like, TV is inherently more narrative. But you could also have a sandbox that's episodic or sandbox that's narrative. And the amount of world state management you do is tied both to how much sandbox versus narrative and how much serial versus episodic. So if you have an episode, you've only really got to manage your world state as much as it's going to impact what's going to happen in a given episode, because it's pretty self-contained. But if you have a sandbox, you've got to know a lot of what's happening in the world around it. So those are kind of, and they're loosey-goosey, like they are not like, this is but there are ways of thinking about telling a long-term or short-term story. And typically when you think about running a one-shot, you're running one episodic thing. That what happens in that one-shot will end and stay in that one-shot. And there's very little world building or management to do because you may never come back to it.
Yeah. Pumpkin wants Deadpool the RPG. I cast metagaming.
Pumpkin, I have done metagaming. Actually, sometimes to good effect. One of my, it's always an amusing trope, especially in a show where you can reality hop. I did once have them go to a different reality that we had been in a previous D&D campaign as the same players. And was just enjoying how long it took them to figure out that they were in this world that they had been in previously, but not as their characters. It was like 100% meta. And it was a private game, like it was our game group friend. Like it was super self-serving, but we all found it fun. I did.
Blizzard Eats Flies didn't put question in there. So with things like traps, how do you balance out the sort of every turn you cast, detect traps over and over and over, feeling like you're just drudging through? Like, is there a good way to make traps interesting and but not like punish the players for not continually going detect traps?
I actually don't know enough of the text of Detect Trap, so I'm not sure what it reveals
I think
to
it's
the player.
more
I
along
think
the
it's
lines
like,
of like
there's a trap here as
if you've
opposed
got
to
a
what it
rogue
is.
rolling to search everything
Yeah,
for
I mean,
traps,
I
every
always
square 10 foot.
I just always operate on the assumption that if like my players are walking through a dungeon, they're on high alert. Like they are paying attention to things around them. And so I sometimes use passive perception as opposed to active perception. I find it weird that both is there. I feel like you should just have one or the other. I think a lot of the trick to finding a trap is the way you present it to them. Like if you're like, yes, you have like, as far as you can tell, like there's something strange about this door, like something will happen, but making it so that they don't necessarily know right away what the problem and therefore the solution is. It's also encouraging players that it's like reminding players that it's okay to put their characters at risk. I've been blessed with characters who are just willing to do that, and like also encouraging them to roleplay their character. Like you have a barbarian and you have a rogue, and like sure, the rogue's gonna be like on their guard looking for traps, and the barbarian's gonna be like, that's a cool door. And so like getting them to also roleplay the like, rogue, you know there's a trap here, barbarian doesn't, like what are you gonna do about it? And like being very clear that like, no, you think this door is fine and you know there's something suspicious about it, and like getting them to figure out in character who fucks with what first.
Yeah. And I think that's also like part of it is what we do is make tabletop RPG shows. We make shows out of us having fun playing these games, and that changes the dynamic a lot. That makes us more inclined to make these things narrative-based than role-based. It makes us more interested in the circumstances around the trap than the trap doing damage.
And I actually often, like, traps will do damage, but I find that it can be interesting to have traps do different things. Like, traps alert people that there's someone in their dungeon. The traps open a door, or, like, you can flip side. You can be like, you're gonna have to trigger this because, like, that's the only way, like, there is, like, a system, right? And you've got a door that you need to open, and you've got, like, and, like, the only way to do this involves the thing that will cause something bad to happen. So I think looking for traps is always one of those things where I try and encourage players to take a more narrative approach to that, to try and play that out much more in character, because some characters are going to be much more inclined to it. But again, that is that really important piece. Like, we're building a show. It's the same reason why I do trust my players to separate meta knowledge from character knowledge. And, like, I mean, I also remember once Claudia, in a campaign we were both in together, playing the most perfect rogue who was like, there's a box. I want what's in the box. I'm going to attempt to open the box. And she got stuck in the box and nearly died because it was, like, trapped when you tried to open it and then, like, exploded. But she was, like, playing her character, which is a rogue that really wanted loot and didn't have a high wisdom. So, like, even though she could have detected traps if she thought about doing it, like, she didn't. She just wanted what was in the box.
She said, ooh, shiny, what's in the box?
Like, yeah. And that was her being willing to put her character at risk and make mistakes. And that mistakes are not actually mistakes. It's a mistake for your character, but it was not a mistake for you as a player.
And again, it comes back to something that we've touched on a lot, whereas, like, RPGs should be, generally, a collaborative experience. The GM isn't opposed to the players. The GM is a facilitator for the players. You're working together to build an entertaining and enjoyable narrative, not necessarily, like, you're not adversarial with one another. So you can, if you have that trust in your players, the players will have that trust in return for you, and you can build a great story together that doesn't necessarily, like, rely on rolling every 10 feet.
And I think some of the things that's useful to set up is expectations at the beginning. Like, if you say up front as the GM, you're like, I am going to assume that your characters, when you are walking through a dungeon in a place where you think you might be in danger, you are going to be paying attention. I'm not going to have you roll. I'm going to use your passive perception, and I'm going to give you information based on your passive perception and how difficult I think it would be for you to spot that. And that's just something that you can establish in front. And maybe you want a home rule that, like, they can declare themselves to be on alert, and in which case you just add 2 to their passive perception. Or they can declare themselves to be like, because I'll often do the thing, I'm like, do you want to go quietly? Do you want to go quickly? Or do you want to go carefully? And, like, you know, how do you want to move through this? And I will give you information based off of that. So if you're like, oh, I want to go carefully, I'll be like, all right, then you're going to have an easier time spotting the dangers. If you're like, I want to go quickly, I'm going to be like, you are not going to spot the dangers. And so I think having some expectations set up around how you're going to give players information in settings is helpful. Especially with perception, I almost never like to tell a player you don't notice anything. Because they notice something. It may not be what they thought they were going to notice, and it may not in fact be helpful for them to notice it, but they are paying some attention to something, and it's like, what did they notice somewhere else? And I still do it sometimes because, like, it's a lot to think about, but always being like, even if you roll an 8, you're like, well, you see a stone wall.
It's cobbled.
It's a nice stone wall. Yeah. It's very smooth. You see a nice stone wall, it's weirdly smooth. Like you say to the person who rolled higher, like you build on and add information to each person.
Without withholding everything, how does one prevent metagaming? And I think it's R2's glare, I think is how you do it.
Just a judgmental you.
Yeah.
Trust.
Yeah.
Trust in the collaboration.
Potentially, yeah, trust, collaboration, communication, and potentially, occasionally, glaring. Letting them know through communication, you're metagaming right now, knock it off. And, like, I mean, I would say that nobody is exempt from that. Like, everybody is going to fall prey to metagaming once in a while. And you just, like, we're all, we're all people. Like,
I think
and so you just say, okay, dial back the metagaming, and you move on.
And you can also, like, do it in subtler ways or less, like, how you can be like, oh, just so you know, your character wouldn't know the difference between X and Y. Like, you can remind them as much as you tell them.
They don't know that.
Yeah, as much as you tell them things they would know in character, you can also remind them of things that they wouldn't know in character. Because sometimes metagaming happens accidentally, too. Like, sometimes you forget, like, my character shouldn't know this piece of information because I know this piece of information. Because, again, you're two people in that moment, but they're only themselves all of the time.
Yeah.
It's a nice stone wall. The dwarf spent years on this stone wall.
Had at least a 30 in masonry. Yeah. More afraid of metagaming than I am. Yeah. And that's a thing. I think you most see it, like, accidentally, like you were saying, where maybe not all of the party is in a particular location, but they all end up involved in the conversation that's being had. Oh, don't forget to mention this. Don't forget to mention this. And it's like, well,
how much would you be able to remind? Or
yeah.
That comes a piece of, like, I know, like, as a character or a player might know that goblins have 7 hit points, but has my character ever encountered goblins before? And I haven't thought about that. And, like, goblins is a bad example because this is a high expectation of encountering it. But, like, some slightly less common creature in the monster manual, you might know more about them than your character does, and you just didn't think about whether or not your character knows that.
So we've only got about 10 minutes left.
Also, in terms of metagaming, it's not... let me think about this. It's okay to have metagamers. It's okay to be a metagamer. It's okay to have that in your game. What's important to remember is that the goal generally with an RPG is that everybody has fun. And if someone's metagaming is preventing someone else from having fun, then you may not be a good fit as a group. And it might be that, like, you have 5 metagamers and one person who isn't, and that one person maybe should go find a different group or vice versa. That's where it's sort of partially setting up some expectations beforehand. I would discourage metagamers in my games because that's not how I play, and they will get frustrated with me as a GM because I give plot armor to NPCs. I do things that they wouldn't like. And I do that in service of telling a story, of making sure that there's a conflict and trying to keep a conflict interesting. And for better, sometimes it doesn't always work. So while there is nothing wrong with being a metagamer, it is important to do that within the right group.
Trooper is asking what my homework is.
Oh, what's for session 0? Do you need... I mean, I guess my question for you, because you're doing session 0 before the next episode of this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question is for you. Do you need help planning session 0?
Probably.
Okay.
But only in loose terms, because, again, I'm not, like, we'll probably record it, but it's not an episode.
Cool.
It's not something that I'm worried about being perfect and whatnot. So
you will record episode 0, or you record us planning episode 0?
No, I will record episode 0.
Cool.
Because, yeah, just so that we have it, but I'm like, it'll probably only end up taking half as much time as I plan or whatever. Like, I'm much less stressed about episode 0 than I am episode 1, which might actually air the 26th, the same day that we're doing the fundraiser. It might air during the fundraiser, but if it doesn't, then it's not going to air until mid-June. And the next episode would be mid-June, which is why the fundraiser is on the 26th, is because the next 2 Saturdays I am gone for my wedding. So Yeah. I need to suss out people's feelings on starting mid-June. Season 3 is a mess.
Sorry. It is certainly partially my fault. In no small part because I'm taking the other GM with me to England. So of the 3 GMs that we have in this channel right now,
we're all going to be gone for 1 week, and then 2 of you are gone.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, we're all gone for good portions of June.
It's great.
So I guess literally your homework is plan episode 0, and then be prepared to tell me about episodes. Do it, and then tell me about it next week. We'll talk about episode 0, and probably talk about how do I plan, and what are some strategies for how to plan a episode, and also like an episode versus a narrative segment. Oh, I straight up admitted that they had plot armor because I was like, they need to hate you, and you need to hate them. So they need to have seen through your terrible lie. In fairness, I was like, only one person out of 4 convinced people that was a mistake, or that it was a performance. And I'm like, one person's critical success doesn't negate the other 3 people assaulting another person in front of a crowd. Like, I also have a heart. D&D is such a swingy system. I do struggle with it sometimes. Metagaming, I also wanted to mention slightly that I also think about metagaming. There's the metagaming side of character versus player knowledge, and then there's the metagaming side of like system knowledge. And some of it is like I'm going to metagame because I know how much damage this thing will take. And then some of it's like I'm going to metagame because I know information that my character doesn't know. So some parts are better or worse. Someone asked a question about managing in-character versus out-of-character knowledge, like a character that has a high wisdom or a high int. And I agree with a lot of what Trooper's saying. Is like, I don't think it's metagaming. If I think if a player's like, my character is very intelligent, I'll be like, yes, this is what your character knows without having to roll. Your character is inherently intelligent, therefore would remember things or know things. I don't like having to roll to remember something that I think your character would remember.
Yeah. And I think that's where it's a conversation between the player and the GM.
Yeah.
Like, would my character have any idea what's going on here? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Like, and it's having that dialogue.
Yeah, and it can be a back and forth where, like, as a player, I might say, like, my character would remember this person's name. I don't remember their name. Yeah. And as a GM, I'll be like, yes, your character would remember this person's name. It's blah. Like, I'm not going to punish you because you didn't write their name down in the notes. Because you didn't. That's fine. On the flip side, like, if someone's like, I know this, I'm going to be like, hey, your character's not that smart. Like, would they know this? And so you can have that conversation as a back and forth as opposed to a roll for it. And, like, rolling is a really useful tool if you, as the GM, don't know. If you're like, I'm not sure if your character would know this.
Yeah.
And you can use the roll to help you decide how much they would know or how little. And so, like, sometimes I will get them. I'll be like, roll a no in stars without number. I'll be like, roll no in intelligence. And I'll use that to help me gauge how much information their character would know. But other times, like, one of us has a distinction. Wouldn't I think a heavy metagamer would be more good with plot armor because they're always operating on a meta story level, but a meta story player is I think meta story player would be different than a meta game player because I think a meta story player is that like they are always thinking about like, oh, what's the plan for the story? Where's the story going? I'm gonna make decisions because I think it's what the GM's trying to get to in terms of story because that's 100% what I do as a player. I'm like, what's the GM's goal with this story? Is it for us to get kidnapped? Okay, then I'm going to put my character in this situation. But a meta gamer, I think, is more about the mechanics. And they're probably people who would be uncomfortable with them, like, well, I rolled better, therefore I should succeed, where I'm going to be like,
people
I
who
need
are
this
trying
person
to
to not
win.
be dead. Yeah, 100%. Like, a meta player who knows to go to the basement because you're in a slasher game, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to go to the basement. It's a totally dumb idea out of character, but in character, it seems like a great plan.
Yeah, I think that's probably about it. We'll be back in a few hours for the finale of High School Royale.
There'll be no horror tonight, probably not.
Everyone's going to die.
I don't know what's gonna happen. I have no idea.
It's gonna be great.
I'm genuinely kind of worried.
So yeah, thank you all very, very much for hanging out with us this episode. Thank you, Lauren, very much for your tutelage. Like I said, we'll be back. That's all I got. Do you want to give a more professional outro?
Sure. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here, for watching, for the donations, the follows, the tips, no, not the tips, the donations, the follows, the hosts, and all of those things, and the support that came through. We will be back in about 3 hours with the final episode of High School Royale. This Friday, we will have the final episode of Right Click. They may or may not be fighting giant spiders. And then we will be back with this show next week to hear all about how episode 0 went, and to talk about planning episode 1.
And thank you for GM201. Thank you for that $5.55.
I think that's everything. So we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.
Bye. Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.